The answer isn't about working less, it's about having a completely different relationship with what we call time. Researchers at Harvard University published a study that followed more than 4,000 adults over 15 years. The result was surprising. The people who reported the greatest life satisfaction were not the most productive. They were the ones who felt the most fulfilled, gifts in the activities they carried out. No more time, more presence. This is what the Japanese call mastering time, not filling every second, not running faster, but learning to dwell time in a completely different way. And today, you're going to hear Max's story. A 23-year-old American who experienced firsthand what it means to be trapped in this situation and what happened when he accidentally discovered Japanese teachings that nobody teaches you in school. Chapter 1. The Trap of Being Busy. Max woke up every day at 5:47 in the morning, not because he needed to, but because he had read somewhere that the most successful people in the world woke up before 6. He had a list, a huge list, with tasks color-coded, divided into time blocks with alarms every 25 minutes, using the Pomodoro technique, which he had also learned from some other video. Max was, as far as anyone from the outside could see, incredibly organized. He would wake up, meditate for 10 minutes because he'd heard it increased productivity, then go for a 30-minute run because he'd read that morning exercise improved focus, have a meticulously planned breakfast, and at 7 a.m. sharp he was in front of the computer, ready to start the day. He was studying digital marketing. He wanted to start his own business. He had short, medium, and long-term goals. He had spreadsheets, he had podcasts, he had courses. And yet, every time night came, Max would lie down with the same heavy feeling in his chest. The feeling that I hadn't done enough. It didn't matter how many tasks he had completed. It didn't matter how hard he had worked. There was always one more thing that should have been done. Always an item on the list left over. Always a version of himself that was one step ahead and that he could never reach. At 23 years old, Max was exhausted, and the scariest thing of all is that he didn't know why. Although on a Thursday in October, everything fell apart. Max had an important presentation that day. He had spent the last 3 days preparing each slide, rehearsing each sentence, timing every part of the presentation so that it would fit exactly within the allotted time. But that morning, when he opened his computer, he realized he had saved the wrong file. 3 days of work, 6 hours of sleep a night, enough caffeine to fuel a truck. All lost. He stood motionless for almost 2 minutes, staring at the screen. Then he closed the computer. He left the apartment and simply started walking. He walked for hours, aimlessly, without headphones, without podcasts, without audiobooks, just walking. It was during this walk that Max passed by a small bookstore on a street he had never explored before. In the window, among old books and worn bindings, was a book with a simple title, handwritten on a yellow piece of paper glued to the cover: The Time of the Samurai. He doesn't know how to explain why he went in. He doesn't know how to explain why he bought the book, but he bought it. And in the following days, while trying to reconstruct his lost work, Max began to read. Chapter 2. The Secret That Nobody Teaches. The first thing Max read that completely stopped his thinking was this: Modern man treats time as an enemy to be defeated. The samurai treated time as a master to be respected. He reread that sentence 3 times, because he realized that this was exactly the relationship he had with time: a war. Each day was a battle to beat the clock, to do more, consume more, produce more, and wars, by definition, exhaust those who wage them. The book introduced a concept that Max had never heard of: Ma. Ma doesn't have a direct translation into English or any Western language. It's usually translated as space or pause, but that doesn't capture the depth of its meaning. Ma, as I've explained in other videos on this channel, is the interval. It's the silence between musical notes that gives meaning to the melody. It's the space between words that allows for understanding. It's the pause in breath that sustains life. For the Japanese, Ma does not mean the absence of something. The Ma, it is something. It is a presence in itself. And the book said something that turned Max's world upside down. An agenda without Ma isn't productivity. It's self-inflicted violence. Chapter 3. The First Teaching. Ma. Max began to look at his own schedule as if he were seeing it for the first time. He saw an endless sequence of colored blocks, no real pause, no empty space that wasn't immediately filled with some useful activity. Even rest periods were scheduled with purpose, rest to recover productivity. He wasn't resting. He was recharging like a battery only to spend it all again. The concept of Ma comes from Taoism and has been deeply absorbed into Japanese culture. This concept appears in architecture. Traditional Japanese houses are designed around emptiness, open spaces, not walls. It appears in music. The composer Toru Takemitsu was famous for using silence as an instrument. It appears in martial arts. An effective strike in karate begins with Ma, the interval between movements. And for the samurai, Ma was a matter of life or death. A warrior who didn't know how to inhabit the intervals, who didn't know how to be fully present in the space between actions, was a dead warrior. Because it was in the Ma that the samurai observed. He breathed. He saw what his opponent was going to do before to do. Max read about Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. And Max thought, those who don't know Ma don't know life. He picked up his planner, and for the first time, instead of filling in the empty spaces, he protected them. Chapter 4. The Second Lesson. Ichigo Ichi. A few weeks later, Max was in his neighborhood cafe when something strange happened. He was reading the book with his coffee beside him when he realized he hadn't tasted the coffee. He had simply drunk it, automatically, while reading, while thinking, while planning. How long have you been doing this? He looked at the nearly empty cup and felt a strange pang in his chest, a kind of mourning. For all the coffees I had drunk without tasting them, for all the mornings that had passed while his mind was elsewhere. That day, he read about Ichigo Ichi. Ichigo Ichi is the principle that each moment, each encounter, each conversation, each experience is completely unique and will never be repeated. Not as an empty motivational phrase, but as a physical and philosophical reality. The concept comes from the Japanese tea ceremony. The masters taught that each ceremony should be performed as if it were the only time in a lifetime. Not the last, not the best, but the only one. The host prepared every gesture, every movement, every detail as if that experience could never be repeated. Because I couldn't. The philosopher Sen no Rikyu, considered the greatest tea master of the 16th century, taught his disciples, meet each person as if it were the only possible encounter between you, because in a way, it is. Max closed the book and remained silent for a long moment. He realized he had spent the last few years living on the present, never present, always thinking about the next block on the agenda, the next task, the next goal. And as he raced toward the future, the present, the only place where life truly happens, slipped through his fingers. He picked up the cup, he ordered another coffee, and this time he drank each sip with complete attention. It was, he said later, the best coffee of his life. Chapter 5. The Weight of Speed. But learning these concepts didn't change Max overnight. In the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Max began to feel guilty for slowing down. Every time he took a break, a real break, without checking his phone, without planning, without optimizing, a voice inside him said, "You're wasting time. Your competitors are working on it now. You're going to fall behind." He recognized that voice. It was the voice that Western culture had instilled in him since childhood. The voice of hustle culture. Do sleep when you're dead. Do rise and grind. And that voice was convincing, because the entire society around Max confirmed that voice. His friends did the same. Social media celebrated the same. Resting was laziness. Taking a break was weakness. Emptiness was waste. And then Max read the third teaching, and that's what broke that voice forever. Harahachi Bu. It's a principle from Okinawa, the Japanese island that has one of the highest concentrations of centenarians in the world. People in Okinawa stop eating when they are 80% full. Not stuffed, not satisfied. 80%. Why is that? Because the human body takes about 20 minutes to register satiety. When you eat until you're full, you've actually overeaten. You just didn't know it yet. But Max wasn't interested in dieting. What caught his attention was the note the book added right below the explanation. Hara-Hachi-Bu can be applied to everything. Training, work, concentration. Never push yourself to the limit. Always keep 20% in reserve, because whoever exhausts their reserves in a single day has nothing left for tomorrow. Max froze at that sentence. He had always operated on a 100% or 120% model. If he was working, he worked to the limit. If he was studying, he studied until he couldn't absorb anymore. If he was exercising, he exercised to exhaustion. And then he wondered why he was always tired. The Hara-Hachi-Bu revealed something that no modern productivity guru had been able to say clearly. Sustainability isn't about giving everything you have every day. It's about giving enough so that tomorrow you still have something to give. What Max was discovering in the yellowed pages of an old book, modern science was confirming in laboratories. Neuroscientist Matthew Walker, author of Why We Sleep, documented over decades of research something that the culture of hustle I preferred to ignore it. The human brain doesn't work linearly. It works in cycles, and periods of apparent inactivity, rest, daydreaming, emptiness are biologically essential for memory consolidation, creativity, and decision-making. In other words, the ma that the Japanese have practiced for millennia is neurologically, when the brain does its most important work. Walker wrote, "Rest deprivation is not a badge of honor. It's a failure of management, of energy, of attention, and of life." Psychologist Ellen Langer of Harvard University, who has dedicated decades to the study of mindfulness, discovered that people trained to pay full attention to what they are doing in the present moment not only experience greater satisfaction, but also better performance in complex tasks. Ichigo Ichie wasn't mysticism. It was neurology, and a study published in Journal of Occupational Health Psychology. He followed workers in Japanese companies that adopted the Hara-Hachi-Bu practice applied to the workday and discovered that these workers had, on average, 34% fewer cases of burnout and maintained high performance for much longer periods than colleagues who operated at their limit. Max read the data and felt something unusual, relief, as if someone had finally given him permission to be human. Chapter 6, the fourth lesson. Max almost ignored. But there was a fourth lesson in the book, and Max almost skipped it. I was on the second to last chapter, and the title was simple: Shizen and Mono no Aware. He already had a lot to process. 3 principles that were transforming his way of thinking. But something made him continue. And it was this lesson that changed everything at once. Shizen, it means naturalness. It comes from Taoism and has been deeply incorporated into Japanese philosophy. In the context of time, Shizen means aligning your actions with your natural rhythms rather than forcing productivity against them. The Tao Te Ching says, "A wise man does not fight against the river. He learns where the river flows." The samurai studied the natural cycles with the same seriousness with which they studied combat techniques. They knew that there were moments of clarity and moments of fog, moments of strength and moments of weakness, and that trying to fight at those wrong times was not courage, it was folly. Max began to realize that there were moments in his day when his brain was absolutely on fire, creative, focused, quick. And there were moments when every word he wrote seemed to come out wrong, every decision seemed misguided. And what did he do during those bad times? He pushed harder. He drank more coffee. He put on more pressure. Shizen said, but it was Mono no Aware, which finally made Max sit on the floor of his apartment and reflect deeply on life. Mono no Aware is one of the most profound and untranslatable concepts in Japanese culture, loosely translated as the gentle melancholy of things or the awareness of impermanence. He describes the feeling that arises when you realize that each moment is unique, precisely because it is fleeting. Cherry blossoms, the famous sakura. They are the ultimate symbol of this concept, The Japanese do not celebrate them, despite they only last a few days. They celebrate because, furthermore, the beauty of the sakura is inseparable from its impermanence. And the book ended with a sentence that Max underlined 3 times. The man who doesn't realize that time is passing never learns to value it. The man who realizes too much is paralyzed by anxiety. The wise man realizes, bows before it, and then lives with tranquil urgency. Quiet urgency. Not the frantic urgency Max knew, not the kind that burned his eyes at 2 a.m. in front of the computer, but an urgency born of love, the love for this moment, which exists now, which will not exist tomorrow in the same way. And suddenly, Max understood. It wasn't about doing more. It was about being fully present in what you do. It wasn't about controlling every second. It was about dwell every second. It wasn't about beating time. It was about to be time. Chapter 7. Max's Transformation. In the following months, Max made simple changes. Not dramatic, not revolutionary. Simple. He added Ma to her schedule, deliberately empty spaces that no task could occupy, not to recharge and get back to work, just to exist, to think without a destination, to let silence be silence. He began practicing Ichigo-ichi in conversations, mainly with his mother, who called every week and whom he always answered with one ear while the other was on the computer screen. He started stopping everything when he called, to really listen. And it was in one of these conversations that she told him a story from his childhood that he had never heard before and that made him laugh for minutes. He adopted harahachibu at work, finishing his shift when he had 80% energy left, not when he was at his limit. And he discovered that the next day he showed up with more enthusiasm, more creativity, and more energy than he had ever had working to exhaustion. He stopped fighting against his natural rhythms. He began to observe when he was in a state of flow and when he was stuck, and instead of forcing things during bad times, he used those moments for mechanical tasks, for rest, for aimless walks. And mono unaware? That was the hardest. It required Max to look at things he preferred not to look at, the passing of years, the finiteness of experiences, the fact that his father was getting older and that each visit now had a different weight. But when he embraced it, not as depression but as truth, something changed. He began to truly appear in his own life, no longer as a manager trying to optimize every process, but as someone who knew deep down that this moment, this specific one, this now, would not return. And that's why anything was valid. Chapter 8. Recap and what this means for you. Let me recap what we've seen today because each of these teachings carries a different weight when you really stop to think about it. Ma. Space, interval, pause, reminds us that emptiness is not absence. It is presence of another nature. An agenda without Ma is an instrument being played without any pause. It is not music, it is noise. Ichigo-ichi. This moment, which will never happen again, challenges us to step out of autopilot and treat each experience for what it truly is, unique, unrepeatable, and therefore precious in its own way. Hara-hachi-bu. The wisdom of the 80% liberates us from the tyranny of exhaustion as proof of effort. You are not more valuable because you are more tired. You are more efficient when you preserve what you have. Shaisen. Flowing with nature invites us to stop fighting against ourselves, to observe our rhythms, to work with them, not against them. To recognize that we are not machines that produce linearly, but living beings that function in cycles. And mono no aware. The beauty of impermanence gives us the rarest thing that exists, urgency without anxiety, the recognition that time passes, that each moment is unique, and that this is not a threat. It's an invitation. Max's problem wasn't that he was short on time. It was that he was never there, within from the time I had, and maybe that's your problem too. It's not a lack of time. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not a lack of planning, but a lack of presence, a lack of Ma, a lack of Ichigo-ichi, a lack of the wisdom to know when to stop, when to slow down, when to simply be. The Japanese samurai, with all their battles, their codes, their responsibilities, understood something that takes us a lifetime to learn. You cannot own time, but you can learn to inhabit it. And to inhabit time, to truly inhabit it, begins with a choice. A choice you can make now, at this very moment, the choice to stop running from the present towards a future that, when it arrives, you'll also want to escape. The choice to be here, completely here. The man who rushes through every moment of his life comes to the end without having lived any of them. Zen teaching. So let me ask you something before you close this video. In how many moments are you to be strong? It doesn't tell you to simply overcome things the way people do. It doesn't tell you to go back to being who you were before, because maybe that's exactly the part no one told you. You're not going back to being exactly who you were before. Recent studies on emotional recovery show that most people who have experienced severe depression believe they will never be the same as before. And these people are right. They're just wrong about what that means. You're not going to be the same person. You're going to be something that person could never have been. When we combine the philosophy of kintsugi with other philosophies, such as mono-no awareness, wabi-sabi, and ikigai, we have a series of philosophies that help us see life and wounds from a different perspective. This shows us that the things that have happened to us make us unique. The fact that we have overcome all of life's adversities makes us special. But it also shows us that we will not return to being as we were before. But we don't need to go back to being who we were. We need to move forward. But to truly understand this, not just as a pretty phrase, but as something you can feel in your body, I need to tell you Grace's story. Before we get to the video, I want to say that this video does not replace the need for professional help. I want you to know that depression and anxiety are serious problems and that you don't need to be afraid to seek help. Your life is very important. Never give up fighting for yourself. Now let's move on to Grace's story. Chapter 1. The Weight No One Sees. Grace was 30 years old and had the weariness of someone who had lived 3 lives. Not the kind of tiredness that disappears after a good night's sleep. The other kind. The kind you feel in your bones. The kind that's there when you wake up and is still there when you close your eyes. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a house where the silence was louder than any argument. Her father left when she was 6 years old. No goodbye, no explanation. One day he was there, the next he was gone, and nobody talked about it as if it were a secret everyone knew, but nobody could touch. Her mother, Linda, was a strong woman. She worked 2 shifts at a health clinic, came home with aching feet and still tried to manage everything. Grace admired her mother with all her heart. But children need presence, and presence was what was most scarce in that house. There was no shortage of uncles, cousins, weekend relatives who arrived with their opinions formed and left with yet another wound planted. That girl is just like her father. She'll end up the same way. Did you see the way she looks? It's like there's nothing inside. I don't know what Linda expects from this child. Grace heard everything. Children hear everything. And what she heard for years was a version of herself that didn't deserve much, that she was a problem, that she was the burden, not the solution. She grew up with this weight inside her chest, as if it were part of her body. She reached adolescence without knowing exactly what to call what she felt, only knowing that it was too big to contain within one person. In college, she tried to ignore it. She worked hard, graduated in communications, and got a job at a small agency. On the outside, everything seemed to be working. On the inside, it was like trying to fill a leaky bucket. At age 27, the name finally appeared in a doctor's office. Depression with generalized anxiety disorder. And with the name came the hope that now, with the diagnosis, answers would follow. Chapter 2. All attempts. Grace tried everything. And when I say everything, I'm not using that word in the exaggerated sense that we sometimes use it. I'm using it in the literal sense. Support groups met on Tuesday nights near her house, where everyone shared stories similar to hers, and she would leave feeling that at least she wasn't alone. But the next day, the emptiness would return, just as big. Psychologists, 3 different ones over 2 years. 1 was good, 2 were average, but all of them eventually reached a point where the conversation became circular. and Grace felt like she was telling herself the same story using another person as a mirror. Psychiatrists, medication, dose adjustment, medication change, another adjustment. Some medications took away the pain, but also took away everything else. The ability to feel joy, to feel anger, to feel anything human enough to recognize. And Grace was left wondering what was worse, feeling too much or feeling nothing at all. She wasn't giving up on purpose. She was exhausted in a way that only someone who has tried many times without success can be. It's a different kind of tiredness than laziness. It's the exhaustion of someone who gave everything they had and looked at their own empty hands, not understanding what they did wrong. One Thursday night, Grace was scrolling through Instagram for no reason other than to fill the silence of her apartment when she saw a simple post, a golden ceramic bowl, broken and glued back together with veins of gold running through each crack like rivers on a map. The caption read, "Kintsugi Workshop. Saturday 10 a.m. Limited spaces available." Grace didn't know what kintsugi was, but there was something about that image she couldn't explain. The cracks were there, visible, and they were the most beautiful parts of the piece. She signed up without thinking too much. Sometimes intuition acts faster than fear. Chapter 3. The Woman Who Repairs with Gold. The workshop took place in a small studio in the Ohio City neighborhood, about a dozen chairs around long tables, pieces of broken pottery in front of each person, pots of lacquer and gold dust in the center. Grace arrived 5 minutes late, chose a chair near the door, still with one foot sticking out as she always did, and stared at the fragments in front of her. The woman at the front of the room was Japanese, around 60 years old, with white hair tied in a simple bun, hands that seemed to know exactly what they were doing all the time. Her name was Naoko. Naoko didn't start by talking about technique. She started with a question. Has anyone here ever broken something they loved very much and thrown it away because they thought it would never be the same again? Almost all hands went up. Grace's too. Naoko nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something she already knew. Me too. And for a long time I thought the problem was with me, not with how I viewed the broken things. She then explained kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken ceramics with lacquer mixed with gold, silver or platinum powder, a technique that is over 500 years old and was born from a simple but radical philosophy. The broken object doesn't need to hide what happened to it. The fractures are part of its history, and that history has value. In the West, said Naoko, when something breaks, we have two options. We throw it away, or we try to glue it back together in a way that the crack doesn't show. We hide it, as if the fact that it broke were a shame. She picked up a fragment of the bowl and held it up to the light. In kintsugi, we do the opposite. We fill each crack with gold. We make the fracture visible, not to remind us that the bowl broke, but to say, this bowl lived. This bowl went through something, and that something made it unique. Grace felt something stir in her chest. Not the pain, not the anxiety, something else. Something she couldn't immediately identify because it hadn't appeared in a long time. It was recognition. Chapter 4. What Naoko Saw. At the end of the workshop, while the others wrapped up their pieces and chatted animatedly, Grace stood looking at the bowl she had mended. Golden veins ran through the ceramic in every direction. The piece wasn't perfect, it was alive. She went to talk to Naoko. You managed to make it look beautiful, Grace said, trying to keep her voice steady. But what if what's broken isn't a bowl? Naoko looked at her for a long moment. Not the way people look when they're waiting for their turn to speak. The way people look when they're really seeing you. Do you have time now? Naoko asked. Grace said yes. Then come have tea at my house. I live 10 minutes from here. And so it was, without drama, without much decision, that Grace entered one Saturday afternoon into the life of a woman who was about to change the direction of her own life. Naoko's house was small and filled with ceramics, pieces on every shelf, on every surface, some perfect, most with golden veins that ran through each fracture like constellations. Grace walked slowly through the room while Naoko prepared tea, looking at each piece as if they were pages of a book. When they sat down, Naoko didn't ask what had happened to Grace. She asked something different. When you look at those cracks in the bowls, what do you see? Grace thought for a moment before answering. I see that they've been patched up. That's what you see with your eye, Naoko said. But what do you feel? Grace swallowed hard. I feel that these are the most honest parts of the play. Naoko smiled, the kind of smile of someone who was expecting exactly that answer. Now tell me about yours. Chapter 5. Gold in Fractures. Grace told her story. Everything. Her father who left. Her mother who stayed but could barely be there. Uncles and words that stick more than they should. The depression that crept in slowly and then took over everything. The attempts, the psychologists, the medication, the exhaustion of trying, and the fear of having reached her limit. Naoko listened without interrupting once. When Grace finished, they were silent for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then Naoko spoke. You came here thinking you were looking for a cure, but I think you were looking for another way to see what happened to you. What's the difference? Grace asked. A cure attempts to return you to who you were before. Another way of seeing transforms what you've been through into part of who you are. Naoko went to the shelf and picked up one of the bowls. All patched with gold, irregular, asymmetrical, completely unique. This bowl was 200 years old when it broke. The craftsman who repaired it could have thrown it away. It would have been easier. It would have been cheaper. But he understood something that most people still don't understand. The value of this bowl wasn't in the fact that it was perfect. It was in the history it carried, and the fracture was part of that history. Grace looked at the bowl. Are you telling me that I don't need to be healed? I'm saying that maybe you already are, but you're still trying to erase the marks instead of putting gold on them. Clinical psychologist Bessel van der Kolk, author of the bestseller The Body Remains the Marks, she spent decades studying trauma and recovery. In one of her best-known lectures, she said, "The goal of trauma treatment is not to erase the past. It's to transform the person's relationship with what happened. Healing is not the absence of pain, it's the ability to carry the story without being destroyed by it." And here's what neuroscience confirms. Studies from Tel Aviv University on post-traumatic growth show that 35 to 70% of people who survived highly adverse experiences report at least one aspect of positive personal growth after the trauma. Not despite the trauma. Because of it. This has a name in psychology: post-traumatic growth. And what Kintsugi artistically describes, neuroscience biologically confirms. When we integrate a painful experience into our narrative, instead of trying to erase it, the brain reconstructs connections in a denser, more resilient, and more sophisticated way than before. You don't go back to what you were. You become something that wasn't possible before. Chapter 6. The Four Philosophies. In the following weeks, Grace returned to Naoko's house on Saturdays. Not every week. Sometimes there were good vibes. Sometimes the void returned. But she kept coming back. And Naoko was teaching, not all at once. Slowly, like someone planting things that need time to take root. The first thing Naoko taught was about mono no aware. In Japanese, she explained while they were making tea, this expression means something like the melancholy of things. The awareness that everything is fleeting, that good times pass and bad times pass too, and that there is a silent beauty in accepting this without fighting against it. Grace looked out the window. Outside, the leaves were beginning to fall. It seems sad. It is and it isn't. It's sad in the same way that watching cherry blossoms fall is sad. You know they're going to end. But precisely because they're going to end, you're fully present while they're there. And then Grace understood something that no therapist had been able to make her understand in 2 years of sessions. That recovery wasn't linear because life wasn't linear. That a bad day after a good day wasn't failure. It was the nature of things. And fighting against that, demanding that improvement be constant and perfect, was what was destroying her as much as the depression itself. The second thing Naoko taught was about wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is the beauty of imperfection, of incompleteness, of what is still in process, a wall marked by time, a garden that hasn't been fully pruned, a ceramic tile with irregular edges that no machine could replicate. And what does that have to do with depression? Grace asked with the straightforward skepticism that Naoko had already grown to appreciate. It has to do with comparison, Naoko replied. You compare yourself to an ideal version of yourself that doesn't exist, to who you should be, to who you should have already become. Wabi-sabi says that incompleteness is not the problem. Incompleteness is the natural state of everything that is alive. Grace remained quiet for a while. Then he said, My mother always said I had untapped potential, ever since I was 8 years old. And you internalized that as proof of inadequacy. Isn't that proof? It's a phrase an exhausted mother said to a child she loved but didn't know how to say. Nothing more. The third philosophy came on a day when Grace was feeling particularly unwell. She called Naoko at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, her voice trembling, saying she couldn't get out of bed. Naoko didn't tell her to stand up. So stay in bed. But tell me, is there one thing, just one thing you can do today that's small enough not to be difficult? Grace was left thinking, may I open the window? Then open the window. That was Ikigai, not the self-help version with 4 circles asking you to discover your grand purpose in life. The original Ikigai, the one from Okinawa, the one researchers found when they studied why those people lived so long and with such a high quality of life. For these people, Ikigai wasn't a mission. It was breakfast. It was the neighbor who passed by every afternoon. It was the plant on the windowsill that needed watering. That was enough. Enough for today. And Naoko had understood that Grace needed to rebuild the future, in doses that depression couldn't destroy all at once. Not one grand purpose. An open window, a cup of tea, a replied message, brick by brick. Chapter 7. The day Grace broke again. 3 months after their first encounter, Grace broke down again. It happened on a Friday. A promotion she had been waiting for a year went to someone else. She got home, locked the door, and lay on the bathroom floor for who knows how long, unable to stop crying. And the old voice returned, the voice of her uncles, the voice that said she was exactly what they always said she would be. She called Naoko. Naoko answered on the second ring. She heard everything. And then he said something Grace never forgot. Grace, you're on the bathroom floor. I am. But you called. Silence. Do you understand what this means? The old version of you wouldn't have called. The old version of you would have stayed silent on the ground until the weight became too much. You called. That's the gold in the cracks. You just put gold in a new crack. Grace took a deep breath. I don't want to break anymore. I know, but kintsugi isn't a promise that you'll never break again. It's a promise that each time you break, you'll know what to do with the pieces. And here's what almost no one talks about when discussing recovery. The biggest obstacle is not the pain, it's a disgrace. Researchers at Brown University have found that people who experience shame about their own suffering are twice as likely to respond to treatment as people who do not carry this shame. Twice, not because the shame is stronger, but because the shame prevents the person from asking for help, accepting help, and believing that they deserve help. And do you know what the antithesis of shame is? It's not self-esteem. It's not confidence. It's the radical acceptance of what happened to you. It happened, that the brands are real and that these brands do not diminish your value. That's exactly what kintsugi has been teaching for 500 years. The problem wasn't that the ceramic was broken. The problem was the idea that broken ceramic is worthless. Chapter 8. 6 months later. Grace was not cured. This much is clear. There wasn't a single morning when she woke up and the pain simply disappeared. That's not what happens. Any script that promises you that is lying to you. What happened was different and, in many ways, more powerful. She went back to the psychologist, but this time with a difference. She went with a different internal structure. She wasn't looking to be fixed. She was looking to better understand the golden veins that were already forming. She started making pottery, not specifically because of kintsugi, but because hands occupied with clay were hands that wouldn't be too still with their own thoughts. She wrote a letter to her mother, not to accuse her, to understand. And her mother read the letter crying and said she had never realized how much weight she had placed on words spoken out of exhaustion. She didn't forgive her uncles all at once. Forgiveness doesn't work that way, but she began to understand that their words weren't the truth about her. They were the truth about their pain. And one day, in a conversation with Naoko, Grace said, "I still have bad days. I know. But on bad days now, I can remember that they're just days." Naoko nodded. "That's mono-aware. You've learned to let things be fleeting without needing to control them." "I learned because you taught me." "No," Naoko said, "I showed you a golden bowl. You learned on your own." Philosopher and researcher Kristin Neff, who spent decades studying self-compassion at the University of Texas, says something that resonates deeply with everything we are seeing. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is the ability to treat yourself with the same care you would treat a good friend who is suffering. And it is precisely this ability that makes it possible to get through difficult experiences without being destroyed. Neff discovered in his research that people with high levels of self-compassion recover from failures, losses, and traumas significantly faster. Not because they feel less, but because they don't add shame on top of the pain. These people have suffered enough, no more. And kintsugi, in its essence, is a self-compassion practice with a 500-year history. Kintsugi doesn't ask you to be strong. It asks you to be honest about what's broken and to use gold to reconnect the pieces. Final chapter: what cracks teach us. Today, Grace is 31 years old. She's still seeing a psychologist. She still has difficult weeks. She still carries the scars of a childhood that shouldn't have been the way it was. But she also has something she didn't have before. She has a bowl with veins of gold on the table in her apartment. The same one he made in Naoko's workshop on the afternoon he almost didn't make it. And when the days get tough, she looks at that bowl and remembers. The most beautiful parts of it are the parts that were broken, not despite the cracks, because of them. I know that maybe you're here today because you're also carrying a weight that seems too heavy for one person to bear. I know you may have already tried many things, and that the exhaustion of trying without results has a specific taste that is very difficult to describe to those who don't know it. So let me tell you what kintsugi would say. You're not too broken to be fixed. You're broken in a way that demands gold, not cheap glue. And the difference between these two types of repair changes everything. To recap what we covered today, kintsugi teaches us that fractures don't need to be hidden. The wound can be gilded. That what broke within you isn't proof of weakness. It's proof that you lived through something real, and that this experience is part of who you are now, not an exception to be erased. Mono-aware reminds us that both good days and bad days are fleeting, and that trying to force a constant, linear recovery